Hello and welcome back to class. My name is Rachel Hazan and I'll be your tutor for today's session. In today's session, we'll be looking at various formulas and functions using Excel. And we have a variety of things that we can do with our Excel sheets, and we'll just be mentioning a couple of them in this lesson. And in our second part of this particular session, we'll be looking at the more advanced formulas and functions. All right, so let's start from the most common functions that you work with when you're doing your Excel. You have add, say you want to add two values together, 1 plus 1. You can do 1 plus 1. That would give you, sorry. It is important to know that whenever you're working with formulas in Excel, you always start with an equal sign. So that is your way of telling Excel that what I am writing after this equal sign is a formula, and I want you to treat it as such. So once I do this, it basically gives me 2. Now this is one way to writing your formulas in Excel. There are 4 major ways of writing formulas into your Excel sheet when you're working with your Excel tables. Now this first way is to write manually, just like what I have done. And if you look at this formula bar here, you will see that I have my formula right here. A second way to write your formulas in Excel is to write it directly into this formula bar here. So instead of me using a cell, instead of me writing it from a cell I'm working with, I can come here and then say that I want to subtract, say, 3 from 2. In this formula bar, I can just do 3 equals to 3 minus 2, and there I have my answer. Now the third way of doing this is to use this insert function icon right here. So once I click on this insert function icon, it asks you what you want to do. Now what I want to do next is to multiply, right? So say that I want to multiply now. Or if that doesn't have a category, let me just go. Now you can see these are functions that basically multiplies. And since I'm looking for the product of two values, I can just go for this one here, and then I'm going to click on OK. So right here it's asking for the number range that they want to use. And since this my first cell is D1, the second one is D2, I can just ask my Excel to use that. So once I click on OK, now I have the multiplication of 2 and 1, right? So let's say that the values I have here are 2 and 1. But this particular cell is making use of a product of this cell D1 and this cell D2. So that is a third way of writing your formulas in Excel. And a fourth way of doing that is browsing through this formulas ribbon right here. So when you click on this formulas ribbon, you're going to see your formulas, your function library. So you can check your recently used, and my product is here because that is the last one I used. And then I have some and a couple of other functions. You can decide to use different functions based on what you are working with, and then from here you can move on with that. So those are like the 4 major ways of um, writing your functions in Excel. All right. And also there is something called cell referencing. Now that is basically what Excel did for us here. Cell referencing is basically saying that I want you to do something on this particular cell, but I want you to make use of other cells, right? So if I say I want to work on this division formula right here, and I want to use the cell referencing method, what I do is that instead of me typing in these numbers manually like I have done for this first two, what I'm going to do is to select this particular cell. So I want you to use this cell and then divide it by this cell. So once I click on enter, Excel gives me my answer. So what I basically just did here was to reference these two cells that I have here. That is what we call cell referencing. And also, while you're working with your Excel functions, there are some built-in functions like we have seen right here. And then these are some of the major functions that you would encounter when you're working with your Excel sheets in the nearest future. So we're going to start with sum. And when you have your sum, you can press your tab to put that up. Say I want to add um, these two values together, and then I click on enter, and then that gives us the same thing with this our add. So instead of doing this manually in this way, you can also do it like this, and then you still get the same value. The same thing if I want to find the minimum value. Now, minimum value is to say that what is the smallest value in a particular set or in a particular row. So let's say I want to use this as my data set, and then I check for the minimum value, it's going to return 1, which is the minimum value. Also, the same thing for marks. So we are going to do the same thing. So once I click on marks and I use the very same data set that I have, and then I click on enter, it's going to give me my value. Now for count, count is basically saying I want you to count the total number of filled cells on my sheet, or basically in my data set, right? So when you use count, it's going to count how many cells are filled here. So once I do something like this and I press enter, I have 12. So that is 1, 2, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, then 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. But if you look at what I actually have here, I also covered my E4, right? So it's supposed to count all of these things, but because this particular column is empty, it is not going to count it. So it's basically only counting all filled cells. Now, the difference between count and count A is that count only works with numbers, whereas count A also covers, say, um, letters, right? So if I said I want to use count A and then I do this and I close it, I have the same 12. But if I come here and say that I write my name in here, can you see that has changed? But then my count value did not change because it is different. So if I said I want to add, say, Excel in here, now my count A keeps changing because it is counting the total number of filled cells in that range, whereas count is only counting for the total number of cells and not um, letters and strings. All right, so let me just leave that there. So now for our average, average is basically looking at the middle value. No, it's looking at the average of your total cell, obviously. So I'm just going to do that right here and then do the same thing. And here we have our average, and then we're going to do the same thing for median as well. And here we have our middle value. Now there are other functions that we can see when you're working with your Excel formulas and Excel functions. Some of them you have your square roots, you have when you want to like round up a number, you have want to get like an absolute number, and there are various like so many functions, so many functions. Now these are just functions that start with S. If I change this to an A, you're going to see like a whole lot of functions, basically for almost anything you can think of. If I say that I want to round up this particular value right here, mm, this one, too few arguments, number of digits, right? It is asking me how many numbers I want to round it up to. So I just want it to be just to 2, and here I have 2.67. So instead of having 2.66666 and so on and so forth. Now if I have this if I have a number here that says say minus 16, and I just want an absolute value, and I do this, ABS is going to return an absolute value, which is 16, right? It's going to like take away the minus sign and just gives me the value that I have there. And there are so many other values that you can use with Excel. And the same way you can do your division, you can do your multiplication, your subtraction, your addition. You can also check for the square root and for other things with your Excel. So these are just a couple of things that you can do with it. And our next or the second part of this session of this particular class on formulas, we're going to look at logical functions. That's like your if, your or, your and statements, not statements. We look at text functions like concatenations. We look at date and time functions, VLOOKUP, HLOOKUP, and things like that. So for all of that, I'll see you in the next class.